Okay, so in this video, I want to tell you guys a little work story about how God saved the day. Now, I believe my boss is a narcissist and he likes to dominate the conversation. When we talk, he always wants to point out the smallest bad thing that I did and ignore the biggest good thing that I did. And he also wants to dominate 90% of the conversation. So the first few days, this guy was like railing me, and I was doing pretty decent, I think, but maybe not perfect. And he was like just yelling at me for no reason. And it wasn't like yelling like I was in trouble. He was just yelling because he was a narcissist. So I was like, oh, this is part of my job. I can take it. And I was letting him yell at me, yell at me, yell at me. And he told me one thing. He said, you can't let the clients walk all over you, or else they're going to think it's okay to walk all over you. And then they're going to, have their way with you. And I said, oh, okay. So I didn't really do that with the clients, but at one point he was like continually yelling at me. And I thought to myself, he said if I let him do this, then he's going to walk all over me. And so I talked back to him, basically. I talked back to him. He was dominating 90%. I was like, he must be saying 90% of the words. He's not even listening to me. He's just going on and on about something that I could have saved his breath and told him about. So I interrupted him and I said, no, like, there's clients and you're going to waste the client, because the client was on the phone. And, I yelled at him, basically. Not yelled at him, but I talked back to him. And then I got in trouble, and then nothing happened, and he was like, oh, you can't talk to me like that, blah blah blah. Although I'm not in trouble, I like him. And he's like, you can't talk to me like that. I was like, okay, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be rude. I was just saying, because I felt like you were yelling at me and it's not fair. And then this is where God steps in. So they were like, oh, like kind of mad at me. Then it was like silent. Then he goes and tells the boss. And so I come in the next day, I leave, I go home, and he talks to the boss, and he tells the boss, oh, like, he talked about me, or he talked back to me or something. And then the next morning I go into work, and the boss yells at me. The boss is like, not yelling at me, but he's like, hey, like, you shouldn't talk to him like that, you can't tell him. Although this guy was like railing me. He was like yelling at me and saying 90% of the whole conversation, just talking and talking and talking and saying mean stuff. So I talked back a little. I noticed he stopped railing me. Once I told him that, he like started acting nicer to me, which means it worked. The thing where like not letting him walk all over me if I stand up for myself a little seems to have worked. And so then he stopped railing on me, but then I was in trouble with the boss. So the boss was like, oh, you shouldn't. Then I'm calling clients, and I was like, okay, well, I better get back to work. And I'm calling clients, and all of a sudden I call this guy, and this guy is like, no, you guys shouldn't call me. And I'm super polite on the phone, but he's like, you guys shouldn't call me. This is abusive. This is getting abusive at this point. And then they hear me and everyone's listening to me. And I'm like, oh no, I didn't mean to be abusive. What's the name of your company? And it's like Super Closers. It's the name of the company was like Super Closers or something. And it was like something that was indicating that God was standing up for me, basically. Because then like the lady's mom's phone rang or something. So basically I started talking, having this conversation on the phone about how I didn't intend to be evil or anything. And then they all saw it and they knew it was God. And they were like, oh, God's literally freaking defending him like 10 minutes later. It's hilarious. So then they're like, oh, okay, be nice, Ryan. They started laughing and they were like, like, be nice. You have to be nice, Ryan. And I was like, okay. And since then I've been nice and we've been doing okay at the job. But it was just a cool scenario, and I've had a lot of stories like these where like people were mistreating me and I tried to be nice, and eventually God just stepped in and God's like, no, you're not gonna hurt him. Like it started writing the whole script and scenario to something where it's like telling the person not to be mean to me, and that's something only God, I think, or aliens or something can do, and it's usually to reveal wisdom, and it helps people become wiser when they see stuff like that. So I'm okay with it. It's like teaching. And that's my interesting story for the day. So a lot of stuff like this where like God totally stands up for me has happened, and people totally notice it and they know it's God. So it's pretty interesting. Some people don't believe and are like perseverantly evil. They just want to diligently do the evil thing no matter what. As long as God isn't like physically forcing them to stop, they're not going to stop no matter what. There are people like that, but probably 80% of people aren't like that, and they usually learn like useful messages from God doing this with me. So it's cool. So that's my story for today. Deuces.